Okay, so I'm gonna need every gay person who subscribes for trans analysis to lock in for this one game dev video. I understand that there are no trans coders out there, but we have to keep pushing. Anyway, here's how to make a pretty decent visual novel as a certified idiot. I'll do chapter marks and a summary of what I'll cover soon, but I want an upfront disclaimer. This is coming from someone who just started coding and making a visual novel. About a month ago, I was frightened by the sight of any game engine, so take everything with a grain of salt. Now I put out my first demo and I'm almost finishing up the rest, and I know you can too. First off, I'll take you through the process of creating an idea for a visual novel. It seems simple, but there's a lot of pitfalls that people go into making their first game. Once you have an idea, I'll take you through scripting a broad plot. Then I'm going to instill in you the importance of shitty placeholders. You may be confused as to why something so small would have its own section, but trust me, we'll get to it. I won't go over coding, but I will have some resources in the description that are pretty easy to read on Python. Then we'll get into the actual art and polish. But first, I'm going to proselytize a bit about visual novels as a medium. Trust me, this is going to help making the games. Speaking of, visual novels are not a gaming genre. They are a medium in itself. This is an important distinction because the way we speak and treat this art form reflects on how we create art for it. But what's the difference? In simple terms, the concept of a medium defines what the work is made of, and the genre defines what kind of work it is. For example, a farming simulator is a pretty popular genre. The mechanics of interacting with NPCs, taking care of animals, and generally keeping your farm kept up to snuff is all within the general vibe of a farming sim. It's also under the medium umbrella of video games. Visual novels, however, are sort of like video games. Kind of, walk with me. On the surface, I agree that visual novels hold many of the same core aspects of the medium of video games. Player input on a digital format that affects the story is almost definitionally a video game. However, visual novels largely are not only mechanically different from other games, they also cannot be pinned down to one certain vibe, plot, genre under the same gaming umbrella. The reason I'm differentiating VNs from the label of video games is not to put down the medium, but to free it from the misconceptions that surround it. When I played Slay the Princess, my mind was fucking blown. I didn't even know you could tell a story that is in-depth and beautiful within this medium, and it deeply inspired me. TLDR, visual novels can tell a variety of stories because it is a blended mode of literature, combining conventional gaming and traditional narrative structure. Side note, a lot of the people that argue that VNs aren't real games can be Gamergate adjacent and hate the medium because of its feminine stereotypes. I want it to be known that I am better than them in every way and my brain is bigger. Onto the meat and potatoes. Starting a project of any sort requires an idea. I'm assuming this is your first visual novel, so I want you to shelve your huge, big-brained, dramatic, emotional story for another day. There are a few reasons for this. 1. You're learning and won't live up to your own high expectations. If you've been thinking about this concept for so long, it's probably very precious to you. That's great for when you have the experience to execute it. You may end up putting such a high bar in your head for this story that when you hit several roadblocks, which you will, it'll be 10 times more frustrating than a training one-off. 2. The nature of game development is that any idea will balloon into something bigger. Did you know Hollow Knight was part of a game jam? For clarity, Game jams are a community-based event where people make games in a short amount of time. While Hollow Knight started off as a tiny Newgrounds submission, it ballooned into a massive indie darling. Point is, most ideas for games are larger in scope than you think. Probably halfway in making this game is when you realize that you may be in over your head. To avoid ruining your experience, I recommend starting off new and small. As an example, my premise for my visual novel is that you and your girlfriend are visiting her rocky family home for the holidays. This idea is a pretty good first project for a few reasons. One, the character dynamics are limited to a few people. While at first this can be seen as limiting, it actually allows for a better, more compelling story. A critique I have of some visual novels is that the writing isn't focused enough because of the excess of characters. I again took some inspiration from the visual novel Slay the Princess on this, where the dynamics are in depth and emotional in part because of the limited character count. Taking thematic inspiration from other visual novels is a great idea because it's the same medium and may use similar techniques. 2. There is a set time frame that the game resides in. When writing this type of project, you need to have the endings in sight, at least vaguely. This medium usually has multiple routes for the player to make choices in, and it can be very difficult to keep track of interactions once the story grows. To mitigate this, limit the time frame that the plot resides in. When the setting is limited, the art is less overwhelming to do. Since the game resides in one place, I learned quickly that I can reuse background assets often for several scenes. In fact, I highly encourage you to ask yourself if your next illustration can be recycled for another scene. Put a pin in the illustration side of this for now. You may notice a very obvious theme here: limitation. I want to instill in you that setting limits on your first indie project is not bad, because it keeps the project achievable for one person. It also forces you to keep the writing tighter and to the point rather than the plot becoming unintelligible and complicated. Making a VN idea is similar to any other story as it has characters, a setting, and plot. But it also has certain attributes that can be different and implemented. After choosing your core concept in a genre, such as fantasy or romance, you want to have a question in mind. In my experience, it's best to keep it short and simple. Personally, my VN question is staying worse than leaving? This also has the double effect of spelling out the two routes available to the player. The question should lead to at least a couple answers in one sentence. Most VN creators start by developing the cast. Some concepts to start are: what's their name, role, vibe? What do they want? What are they hiding? How can they change depending on the route taken? Remember that routes are basically character arcs wearing a trench coat. Most visual novels are dependent on player choice and character change. So for the love of God, please plan this early. Choices come next. Paired up with our set characters, this is where things get complicated. Common choice types include values, honesty versus comfort, relationships, who you side with, hidden stats like affection, trust, suspicion, illusion of choice, flavor that doesn't really affect anything, but just kind of vibes. Then you can decide whether it immediately branches to another scene or route, change a variable, or only affects later scenes. Side note, I highly recommend looking into the official RunPy coding book during this process, since it'll take you through the concepts like variables way better. The long and short of it is that you want the player to know their choices affect the game's plot. It makes them more invested in the experience and immerses them in your world. Instead of writing 10 branches at once, people usually fully outline one route, build the shared structure, then clone and mutate for other routes. This keeps the scope sane and prevents abandoned half routes in the void. Note that I did not do this my first time, and I did indeed suffer. I also advise you to script in chunks, not all at once. Actual writing happens usually scene by scene in playable order while testing in RenPy. Most devs write intro, test, revise. First choice, test, revise. Not entire novel, then code. Because we're not writing a traditional novel, we're writing a visual one. Continually going back and forth between coding and playing scenes also puts you in the shoes of a player rather than a writer. When talking about achievability in the game development process, placeholders are goddamn key. A placeholder is basically a stock photo or a quick doodle you made so you can visualize the end result of your visual novel. Do not think hard about the photo quality. Use screenshots. Just make sure it fits the vibe of the scene and the background. If you're on my channel, there is a good chance you are an artist. You are probably interested in making some sort of game since you've made it this far. While I have all the love in my heart for you, I'm smacking your tablet pen away. Other than stray concept art, do not start all of your artwork until you are halfway done with the game. Okay, that's a bit harsh. Let's have some caveats. You're allowed to make some art early. Concept art is great. Character designs are great. A mood board that makes you excited to open the project again is great. What I am begging you not to do is fully render 15 sprites and 6 backgrounds for a scene that may honestly get cut out later. Here's the reality. When you're making a visual novel for the first time, the script will change. Scenes will be rewritten. Choices will be added. Routes will collapse in on themselves like dying stars. If you've already sunk hours into polished art for those moments, every change will feel like you're deleting your own organs. If the scene works with ugly art, it will sing with good art later. Once you're about halfway through the game, something magical happens. You actually know what the game is. That's when you start polishing. That's when you commit to final sprites, refine backgrounds. CGs for emotional peaks. Not before. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. Finish the game first, then make it pretty. Thank you all for watching. This is a different video than usual, so I hope y'all enjoy it. My itch.io page is in the description. Make sure to follow it and be notified when my game drops. Thank you again.